Imagine a world where the stock ticker in New York never went dark. A world where the wealth of the Roaring Twenties wasn't just a brief, dizzying party, but a prelude to decades of unbroken prosperity. What if the global economic crisis of the 1930s, the Great Depression, never happened? What if the banks didn't fail, the farms weren't foreclosed on, and the breadlines never formed? The Great Depression was more than just an economic event, it was a crisis that reshaped a generation and forged the modern American state. It gave us the New Deal, a new social contract between the government and its people, and a sense of shared hardship that defined a national identity. But what if that crucible never existed? What if the crash of 1929 was merely a blip, a minor correction in an ever-upward trajectory? In this timeline, the promise of endless growth continues unchecked, and the world marches forward without the great sobering lesson of economic collapse. We'll explore a society of relentless optimism and prosperity, but we'll also uncover the hidden costs of a world without crisis. Would America, and the world, have been better off without the pain of the 1930s? Or would the absence of a great trial have prevented us from building a more resilient, compassionate, and ultimately more just society? This is a journey into a world of unchecked ambition, a look at an America that never faced its most profound test. The golden age of unbroken prosperity in this timeline, the stock market crash of 1929 is averted. A combination of more effective Federal Reserve policy and a slower, more regulated growth in the late 1920s prevents the speculative bubble from bursting. Instead, the Roaring Twenties continue, not as a flash in the pan, but as the foundation of a new era of sustained prosperity. The nation, and indeed the world, would enter a golden age of unbroken prosperity. The economic engines of the 1920s, mass production, consumer credit, and technological innovation, would continue to hum. The automotive industry, led by Ford and General Motors, would continue its rapid expansion, creating new jobs and new wealth. The radio, a new medium for entertainment and information, would flourish, creating a mass culture and a new kind of celebrity. The aviation industry would take off, as air travel, once a luxury, would become a more common and affordable mode of transportation. The cities, already sprawling with the excitement of the 1920s, would continue to grow, with new skyscrapers reaching ever higher, a testament to the boundless optimism of the age. There would be no need for the massive infrastructure projects of the New Deal, as the private sector, flush with cash, would continue to build and expand on its own. This era of endless growth would also have a profound impact on technology and innovation. The need to conserve resources, which was a key driver of innovation in the 1930s and 40s in our timeline, would be absent. Instead, innovation would be focused on consumer goods and entertainment. Color television would arrive decades earlier. Plastics, once a rarity, would become ubiquitous. The consumerist culture of the 1950s would begin much earlier, a society built on the endless acquisition of goods. The American dream, once a concept, would become a tangible reality for millions, as homeownership and a comfortable middle-class life would be within reach. The world would see America as an unstoppable economic juggernaut, a shining city on a hill, a model of capitalism triumphant. This would be a world of gleaming chrome, of relentless optimism, and of an unshakable belief in the power of progress. The American story would not be one of struggle and triumph, but of effortless ascent. The social and political fallout. While the economy would be booming, the social and political consequences of a world without the Great Depression would be troubling. The crisis of the 1930s was a wake-up call for the nation, forcing it to confront its deep-seated flaws and build a more resilient social safety net. Without that wake-up call, America would remain a nation of extremes, with a massive, and ever-growing, gap between the rich and the poor. The lack of a social safety net would be a key feature of this timeline. There would be no social security, no federal unemployment benefits, and no government-backed programs to aid the poor and the elderly. The belief in rugged individualism and private charity would remain the dominant ideology. The wealthy would become even wealthier, as their fortunes would continue to grow unchecked. The working class, meanwhile, would have no recourse in times of personal crisis. A simple illness or job loss would mean utter ruin. This would lead to a society of incredible wealth and profound, often hidden, poverty. The great divide between the rich and poor, which was a source of tension in our timeline, would be far more pronounced in this one. Politically, the nation would become complacent. The political establishment, with no major crisis to force its hand, would be more resistant to change and reform. The progressive era, which had been a powerful force for change, would lose its momentum. The populist movements of the 1930s, which were a direct response to the economic crisis, would never take hold. This would lead to a more rigid, less responsive political system, one that is more beholden to the interests of the powerful and less to the needs of the people. This complacency would also have a global impact. In Europe, the desperation and instability that fueled the rise of extremist ideologies like fascism and communism would be less pronounced. With a strong, stable global economy, there would be less fertile ground for demagogues and political upheaval. The world, while more prosperous, would also be more politically static, less willing to confront its flaws and more resistant to change. A different world at war. The absence of the Great Depression would have a profound and unsettling impact on the course of World War II. In our timeline, the economic crisis was a key factor in the rise of fascism in Germany and Italy. The desperation of the German people, reeling from hyperinflation and unemployment, made them susceptible to the promises of a demagogue like Hitler. Without this economic and social chaos, it is far more likely that the Nazi Party would have remained a fringe movement, unable to gain a foothold in mainstream German politics. The same could be said for Italy, and the political and economic instability that led to the rise of Mussolini. It is entirely plausible that, without the Great Depression, World War II as we know it would never have happened. However, a different, more localized conflict might still have occurred. The territorial ambitions of Japan in the Pacific, and the long-simmering tensions in Europe, could still have led to a military conflict. But without the widespread devastation of a global war, the United States' role in the world would be very different. In our timeline, the Depression led to a wave of isolationist sentiment in America. The crisis forced the US to turn inward, to focus on its own problems and to be hesitant about getting involved in another European conflict. In a world without the Depression, America would be a far more confident and powerful nation, with a thriving economy and a less hesitant foreign policy. This could lead to two possible scenarios: either America's early intervention could have prevented the war from escalating, or its overconfidence could have led to a more aggressive foreign policy, and a different, perhaps more devastating, conflict. The absence of a great global war would also have a profound impact on the post-war world. There would be no Cold War as we know it. The Soviet Union, having not been weakened by a massive war, might have been a more formidable foe, but without the global devastation, the need for American leadership and the Marshall Plan would be absent. The world would not be divided into two competing blocs. Instead, a new global order would emerge, one where economic power, not military strength, is the primary source of influence. This would be a world of competing economic spheres, with the United States as a benevolent, but ultimately self-interested, global superpower. The world would be more peaceful, more prosperous, but also less united, with no shared, universal struggle to bind humanity together. Final reflections and the cost of a flawless history. This timeline, one where the Great Depression never happened, shows us the profound and often hidden consequences of our historical trials. It is a world of unbroken prosperity, of endless optimism, and of relentless growth. But it is also a world without a social safety net, without a sense of shared community, and without a collective understanding of what it means to be truly vulnerable. The paradox of this timeline is that by avoiding a great crisis, America would have lost the opportunity to build a more resilient, compassionate, and more just society. The New Deal, which was a response to a profound national crisis, would never have come to be, and the nation would have remained a collection of competing interests, not a unified whole. This is a powerful, and deeply moving, look at a nation that never faced its most profound test. It is a world where the promise of a golden age was realized, but at the cost of a deeper, more profound humanity. If America never had the shared hardship of the Great Depression, do you think it would be a more individualistic or a more unified society? Without the economic despair that fueled extremism in Europe, do you think World War II would have been avoided entirely? What do you think would be the most valuable resource in a world where economic crisis is not a possibility? If you want to keep exploring the what-ifs and see how our world could be different, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Timeline Shift, and get ready for our next adventure.